Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling, well, a really complex piece of history, often quite shadowy, the State Security Service of Communist Yugoslavia.
An organization may be best known and definitely feared by its acronym UDBA.
Exactly. We've got some really interesting excerpts here outlining the agency's path from its creation right up to Yugoslavia's dissolution.
Mm-hmm.
So our goal in this deep dive is to unpack these sources, try to understand how UDBA evolved, what it did, its reach, basically. We want to pull out the essential knowledge.
Understanding UDBA is pretty crucial. It really opens a window onto how state power worked in Yugoslavia's unique socialist system and how that power shifted over the years.
Okay, let's dive in. Where should we start? The beginning, I suppose.
Right. It wasn't the very first security agency under Tito, but the UDBA itself was formally set up on March 13th, 1946.
Its first official name being the Directorate for State Security.
Correct.
And that name, in Serbo-Croatian, Uprava Državne bezbednosti. That's the origin of UDBA, right?
That's it. And what's really striking from the sources is how that acronym, UDBA, it just stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even when they officially changed the name later on, people just kept calling it the UDBA right through its whole history.
And that change happened in '66, didn't it? After Alexander Rankovic, the chief, was ousted.
Uh-huh. It was renamed the State Security Service. You get different acronyms depending on the language variant, SDB or SDS.
But everyone still said UDBA.
Pretty much, yeah. Colloquially, it was always UDBA. And we should probably mention its predecessor, OZDNA. UDBA sort of rose from its ashes.
Right, so OZDNA was dissolved, and UDBA took over its people and its job, essentially.
Correct.
Okay, let's look at those first couple of decades, say 46 to 66. What was UDBA like then? What was its job?
Well, in those early days, it was a really central part of Yugoslavia's whole intelligence system, its main focus, internal state security.
Keeping things stable at home.
Exactly. Its structure changed a bit. They had districts right after the war, then a big reorganization around 1950.
And ideologically, what were they looking for? What counted as a threat?
That's key. The state was pushing certain values, collectivism, brotherhood and unity, social harmony, loyalty, even a bit of tolerance for different views, surprisingly.
Okay.
But the sources stress that any deviation from those values, not just plotting rebellion, but seeming ideologically off track, that became an immediate issue for UDBA. It was about enforcing the party line.
Wow. So a very broad remit. And after OZNA disappeared, how was the whole intelligence pie divided up?
It got split three ways, basically. You had UDBA inside the Federal Ministry of the Interior handling domestic stuff.
Right.
Then foreign intelligence fell to the SID service for research and documentation, which was part of the foreign ministry.
Okay.
And the Army, the JNA, had its own counterintelligence service, the KOS.
Got it. Now let's talk about its power. The sources call it a feared tool of control.
Oh, absolutely. Though it's interesting, the sources also hint it might have operated with a little more restraint compared to, say, the Stasi or other Eastern Bloc secret police.
A relative difference? Maybe. But still, it's called a political police. What does that mean in practice? How does it work?
It means it wasn't independent, like police in the West might claim to be. It answered directly to the League of Communists. The party gave it its marching orders, and it reported back to the party.
And how deep did its roots go into society? Was it just watching known dissidents?
Oh, much deeper.
Mm-hmm.
A really telling detail is that UDBA had to prepare political security assessments on, well, basically everything.
Everything. Like what?
Culture, the economy, social moods, you name it. It wasn't just about political groups. It shows how it was woven into the system, acting as the party's eyes and ears everywhere.
That's quite something. What about practical powers? Could they arrest people?
Yes, definitely. They had classic police powers, identification, interrogations, making arrests.
Okay.
But the sources also highlight the use of secret legislation, stuff published in a secret official gazette. This allowed for special operations.
Special operations. Sounds ominous. What are we talking about?
Things like secret house searches, planting bugs, tapping phones, covert surveillance, intercepting mail, the standard toolkit of a secret police force.
And its main target remained the domestic enemy.
Overwhelmingly. The sources list groups like the bourgeois right wing, clergy, Cominform supporters, those loyal to Moscow after the split nationalists, separatists.
A wide range of potential enemies.
Yes, and in this early phase, work abroad was seen as less critical and kept tightly under federal control.
So a picture emerges. Centralized, powerful, deeply tied to the party. But then 1966 happens. A major shift. What was the trigger?
The big catalyst was the Brioni Plenum, a meeting of the party's Central Committee in July '66. The political leadership basically accused the SDB, the new official name, of getting in the way of reforms.
Reforms towards self-management.
Exactly. Self-management was a core tenet of Yugoslav socialism, and the accusation was that the security service was hindering its development. That's a huge charge from within the system.
So what happened to the SDB as a result?
Well, it got fundamentally decentralized. Big staff cuts, especially at the federal level, oversight commissions were set up, and crucially, new rules came in that boosted the independence of the security services in each republic and province.
So it went from one big federal agency to, what, 8 smaller ones?
Pretty much. 8 semi-independent organizations, yeah. One for each republic and autonomous province, with Belgrade acting more as a coordinator. And importantly, the sources say the SDB lost most of its executive powers. Meaning its main job shifted more towards identifying and preventing threats rather than directly making arrests or carrying out interventions itself. That role shifted more towards regular police or other bodies.
And the republics gained more power over their own security apparatus.
Definitely. A 1967 law on internal affairs was key. It gave the republics direct control and much more say over their security services for the first time since the war ended.
Okay, let's zoom in on that period, say mid-60s to mid-70s. What kind of major events was the UDBA-SDB dealing with then?
Well, the sources mention an early success, Operation Gvardijan back in '63, stopping some ex-Ustasha infiltrators.
Right.
But mostly, their work reflected the big political upheavals happening.
Like what, domestically?
Oh, lots. The political fights around the Brioni Plenum itself, various challenges to central authority dubbed liberal flare-ups, the huge student protests in Belgrade in '68.
That must have shaken things up.
It did. Then you had the Croatian Spring, or Maspach in '71, the Bugojno Group incursion in '72, and just a general rise in nationalist sentiments in different republics in the early '70s. The SDB was busy.
And internationally. Any big events impacting them?
The big one was the Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia in '68. Yugoslavia was always worried about something similar happening to them, given their non-aligned stance, so that definitely focused security attention.
Now, even with this decentralization after '66, was Belgrade still pulling some strings? Was there still federal coordination?
Initially, yes. The Republican SDBs were still legally linked to the federal body in Belgrade, which was meant to coordinate things and give instructions. A 1971 law still gave the federal secretariat that coordination role.
So the shift wasn't instantaneous?
No, it was a process. The really big constitutional change came in 1974. The new Yugoslav constitution pushed decentralization much further, across the board, not just in security.
And what happened to the federal security body then?
It gradually got weaker. The sources say the Federal Secretariat for Internal Affairs became more like a clearinghouse for information.
Less directive, more administrative.
Exactly. And eventually, way down the line in '92, after Yugoslavia was breaking up, what was left of it was basically absorbed by the Serbian Ministry of the Interior, which kind of shows how federal power just evaporated in that area.
And the republics formally took charge of state security?
Yes. By 1978, new laws made state security explicitly the job of the Republic Secretariats of Internal Affairs, the RSUPs. It became part of their remit, losing some of that special status the SDB used to have.
Okay. Now, we need to address probably the most disturbing aspect mentioned in the sources, the allegations of eliminations.
Yes, this is a very dark chapter. The sources state quite directly that UDBA is alleged to have been responsible for eliminating potentially thousands of perceived state enemies.
Thousands. That's it. Yeah. Is there a more specific number for the targeted killings and kidnappings?
The sources mention an estimate of around 200 assassinations and kidnappings, both inside Yugoslavia and abroad. And it's important, as the sources do, to differentiate the targets.
Oh, so?
Well, some were targeted as alleged war criminals from WWII. Others were targeted purely for their political opposition or activities in exile.
Can you give some examples the sources cite?
Sure. On the war criminal side, they mentioned Vjekoslav Luburic, a high-ranking Ustasha figure killed in Spain.
Okay. And on the side of political opponents killed abroad?
Several names come up. Bruno Bušić, a Croatian writer, killed in France. Dragiša Kašugaš, a Serbian writer, killed in the U.S.
Wow, far afield.
Yeah. Others mentioned include Ivo Pertulipak in Italy, Nahid Kulinovic, Yusuf Gervala, Stepan Jurakovic, all in West Germany, Enver Hodri in Belgium, and Nikola Otadol, who actually survived an attempt. It shows the UDBA's reach was truly international when it came to silencing opponents.
As Yugoslavia itself started heading towards collapse in the late 80s, what happened to the SDB?
Well, things started changing fast after about 1986. You had democratization kicking in, more political freedom.
And that put the spotlight on the security services.
Exactly. They came under public attack, faced criticism like never before. The Communist Party structures within the SDB were dismantled, and you saw the first real attempts at parliamentary oversight.
Isn't the first multi-party elections in 1990 must have really fractured things?
They absolutely did. While pushing democracy forward, they also just increased the divisions between the Republican SDBs. The federal leadership, the SSUPS-SDB, tried to hang on to control, but the Republican branches were increasingly looking to their own new governments and situations.
Did they lose experienced people during this turmoil?
Yes, the sources mention a significant loss of professional staff, especially those who knew how to handle the domestic field, the surveillance of internal groups.
And what about all the information they'd gathered over decades? Their archives.
That's a really worrying point in the sources. As the conflicts ramped up, it seems SDB archives started being systematically destroyed,
Destroyed? Why?
presumably to hide past actions, protect individuals, who knows for sure. But it happened, and the Republican SDBs also stopped sharing information upwards with Belgrade, except maybe some foreign intelligence stuff. And there was another dynamic. The Army Security Service, KOS, tried to step into the vacuum, assert more influence over the fragmenting SDBs.
Did that work?
Not really, according to the sources. KOS apparently relied on mixed nationality personnel who often didn't have the local access or power to make a difference as things fell apart.
So the whole structure was crumbling from the inside, even before the country formally broke up.
Completely. The UDBA-SDB effectively ceased to exist in 1991 as Yugoslavia dissolved. The new country set up their own agencies, though some, like Serbia, kept similar names and structures going forward.
It's undeniable, UDBA was so central to Yugoslavia's story, both visibly and invisibly. What about its legacy now? Are things still coming to light?
Oh, definitely. The grappling with that past continues. The sources mention, for instance, that files were recently opened in Slovenia covering about 1 million citizens.
1 million. Not just Slovenians.
No, from across the former Yugoslavia. It just shows the sheer scale of the surveillance over all those years.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and the legacy pops up in other ways, too. Apparently, back in 2003 and 2010, lists claiming to name former UDBA agents in Slovenia appeared online on a site called UDBA.net.
Are those lists still up?
No. According to the sources, the Slovenian government demanded they be taken down, so they're not accessible now.
Right. So we've kind of followed the arc here. From this powerful, centralized political police obsessed with the domestic enemy, through that major shakeup and decentralization after Rankovic, its role in all those turbulent events, the really dark side with the alleged killings, and then its decline and disintegration as Yugoslavia itself fell apart.
Its story really mirrors Yugoslavia's story, doesn't it? That constant tension between central control and the republics pulling away. It leaves behind a really complicated, often painful legacy.
And that legacy, thinking about those million files, the agent lists appearing and disappearing online, it really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? What is the responsibility of the state when it comes to the archives of its former secret police? And how does a society really come to terms with that past, especially when people involved might still be around? Something to think about.